This man wakes up in the morning with a burning pain in his back and he looks at the deceased lying next to him and he thinks about it. He used to be the captain of the survivors, but now he's the pillow of the deceased. Not only do I have to hug him every day, but I want to have a monkey with him because he was framed by his most trusted teammate. Fang Lian fell from the 7th floor into the zombie crowd and closed his eyes in despair as he watched the rapidly shrinking figure on the roof. However, the imaginary pain did not appear, only the back of the place hit the numb tree right on the sun. There's no time to think. There's a lot of dead people around. I'm gonna run first. Fang Lian suddenly opened his eyes and happened to meet a bloodless face. The other party's pair of pale red eyes stared at him. Fang Lian immediately regretted that he had not smashed this funeral home so hard. The mourner expressionlessly looked at the human in his arms and then at the roof, frowning as he offered sacrifices. Fang Lian looked at the mourners who looked up and down. I'd rather die than be depressed in my heart. The eyes of the mourner suddenly shifted from the roof to his face and stared at his mouth. I was a little confused. What are you looking at? Where is the test? At this time, the surrounding households have gathered and reached out to him with their livid black hands. He was so scared that he subconsciously drilled into the arms of this mourner. The king of mourners looked at this human drilling into his red eyes and raised his surrounding mourners. He immediately took 2 steps back. At this time, Liao Fei, the captain of the top floor, Liao Fei slowly came down from the edge of the top floor. His eyes were lifeless and his voice was like a mosquito. The captain fell downstairs. Everyone jumped to the edge and looked down, only to see that the black decision continued to increase in the number of households. Even if the team leader was one enemy, it was impossible to survive from this pile of lost households, but Fang Lian survived 7. It was just that the smell of the zombies around him almost killed me. I could only keep drilling into the arms of the deceased. I stunk to death. I was even more smelly than the defense. The king of the deceased carried him out for more than 10 meters. Listening to the complaints of the human in his arms, he shrugged his nose and could not smell anything. I looked up and looked around at the surrounding group of mourners. I quickly dispersed a little distance. I couldn't bring it back to play. Fang Lian only got a little light and only air that could survive. He opened his mouth to catch his breath, but the one who took him away smelled something, at least not that rotten smell, and the leader of the befuddled killing squad was taken away by the bereaved, becoming the only human in the group. Soon he was taken to a villa surrounded by countless families who followed the road. Fang Lian had never lived in a villa like this before or after the apocalypse, and he ended up lying on the big bed in the villa for the first time. It was actually a mourner who was brought back by a mourner princess. He even pulled a chair and sat beside him. He looked at his red pupils and could not tell what he was feeling. This caused Fang Limao's already broken 3 views to constantly have doubts. Why didn't he bite? Full? Eat tomorrow? He looked carefully at the bereaved family in front of him who was not rotten at all. I don't know at all that although I didn't dare to make a sound from beginning to end, the words in my heart were heard by the other party. My skin was not rotten. You changed your clothes. The blood was not dirty. The mourners stared at him. Suddenly, they looked down at their clothes and paused for a few seconds. Then they heard Fang Lian chanting in their hearts. How long has he been dead? When did he become a sperm? This isn't a bereaved man's fight, is it? And while he's still thinking about it, the bereaved man raises a finger and reaches out to him, so scared that he thinks he's trying to kill himself first. As a result, the finger with dried blood ran across his neck and poked him in his white and clean face. Iubi was very flexible and cautious, afraid that the deceased would suddenly attack and kill himself in advance. He did not dare to move, but he actually saw a trace of curiosity in the zombie's eyes. Your beauty is useless. You are already dead. It is impossible to become so tender. No matter how shameless he boasted, there is no one who can refute him. Those who are wandering around here and outside the window are either dry or missing arms and legs, but tomorrow they may be worse off than those outside and be eaten alive by this zombie in front of them. As the captain of New Yu, who could lead a small team to survive safely for several months in the end, of course he could not wait to be bitten to death and look at the deceased as if he was staring at his own face and distracted. He looked around quickly and saw a landline on the bedside table. The zombie king stared at Fang Lian's fair cheeks as if wondering if he was this fair back then, but he didn't have much memory, and he didn't even understand why he had to lead a group of mourners around that building. Fang Lian flipped over, picked up the landline, and smashed it on the top of the mourner's head. If the zombie king hadn't heard his thoughts in advance, he might have been able to capture it. Fang Lian did not understand why his sudden attack failed. The mourner did not even have a look in his eyes. His reaction was several times faster than his. His wide palm accurately grabbed his wrist like an iron pincer. Fang Lian could not get rid of it. You can only use your other hand to pinch each other's neck. There is no column in the funeral house. Fang Lian's lucky mood seems to be pointing at the whole family. When it is necessary, it will be cold from the top of the head to the feet. With a bang, Wang Meng threw him back into bed with his wrist, and then a pair of red pupils instantly dilated to his eyes, accompanied by Fang Lian's horrified emotions. Wang Meng let out a roar at him face to face. His eardrums hurt, his eyes panicked, he thought he was going to die, but he lost his temper and his teeth slowly retracted, and he said hoarsely, "You want to die?" Fang Lian was even more frightened than before when he was about to be bitten to death. He looked at the deceased in front of him and did not dare to say anything in his heart, but he cursed the street zombies for talking. It seems that he heard him swearing, stuck in front of him, the livid face turned to him, and Fang Lian's scalp tingled subconsciously. He even felt a little redundant when he asked you whether you were alive or dead, especially when he walked all the way back. It felt like he was hanging on a tree right. His body was stiff and cold. He didn't have any body temperature at all. But he could talk. Maybe he wasn't dead yet. Maybe he could still save him. He was used to doubting in his heart. I found that the face of the deceased who was close to me retreated a little bit to a distance that allowed him to breathe. He tilted his head slightly and continued to stare at him. Fang Lian was numb. "Why don't you just bite me to death? Who can stand it when you look at me like this? Who knows when you will suddenly open your mouth and give me a time? If it doesn't hurt to death, I will be scared to pee." The mourner was staring at his dark pupils, listening to him say that he was scared to pee, and then he looked down at Fang Lian's thigh and stretched out his pale and blue hand to quickly grab his pants. Fang Lian's mind was buzzing. He heard the sound of his pants zipper collapsing. He quickly stopped the mourner's wrist and covered his pants. It was hard to hear who was good at stripping people's pants. Not only did he take off his pants, but he also grabbed his clothes and lifted him up from the bed, leaving his legs hanging in the air and not touching the ground. When he chose to tie his shirt, he almost fell down with a hissing sound, and then he was slapped on the waist by the mourner. He stood in front of the toilet. The handsome man who had just looked like a human being had already worn a big hole in his sweater on the threshold. At this time, Fang Lian simply suspected that he was dreaming. He probably woke up late today and still hadn't woken up. Otherwise, how could he have been pushed off the roof by his best friend, and then he didn't fall to his death, but he was taken away by a mourner? In the end, this mourner not only talked, but he also knew that he couldn't pee anywhere. Fang Lian turned his head and glanced at the expressionless mourner standing at the door. He must be dreaming. He raised his hand in disbelief and slapped his mouth. A red palm print appeared on his face with a snap. He heard a loud roar, and the roar of a lost family exploded in his ear. With the pain and numbness on his face, he almost lost it on the spot. A super hiker hid in the corner of the toilet and watched helplessly as the red pupils of the deceased were instantly enlarged. From the expression of Ho Chi, you can completely see how angry he was. He stared at the swollen red palm print on Fang Lian's face and shouted a few more words. Fang Lian, who was hiding in the corner, opened his mouth and almost cried from anger. "What's wrong with this funeral? I hit him. I didn't hit you myself." The King of Mourning took a step forward angrily and shouted at him even more angrily. Fang Lian's mind was full of question marks. "My face, the Zombie King, yelling at me again, who knows what I picked up? I got up so fast, I fell asleep, and now I don't even care about my face anymore." Fang Lian stared at the bereaved family, looked at the bereaved family, and saw that his face was swollen and he was still angry. Fang Lian finally understood that his feelings were not picked up for supper. They were picked up as pets. When he came out of the bathroom, he was thrown onto the bed by the King of Mourners again, and then he continued to sit on the chair and look at himself. Fang Lian was speechless. No one who had the right hand could beat him anyway. Anyway, he did not intend to eat me. Later, he would see which window was easy to smash. "I do not believe that you can keep an eye on me." He looked out of the window next to him. There weren't too many zombies outside. He didn't know how far the window could run. The King of Mourning didn't even move. Fang Lian's eyes fell asleep and suddenly saw a large group of mourners gathered outside the window. "I went to the window and couldn't walk. It was okay. The door wasn't closed. Then I turned to look at the open door. The door was connected to the living room. The glass window of the living room was also broken." The Zombie King's red pupils contracted slightly. After a while, Fang Lian seemed to hear a few dog clicks. Then a few bereaved families with incomplete faces swayed in front of the French windows and died. How could it be so coincidental? Fang Lian was in despair. Fang Lian's sweater was just torn open and sad. The Zombie King's red pupils moved, thinking that Fang Lian was a bit of a wolf, but he didn't just look good. However, from the torn clothes, he could see that his skin was very clean. The mourner reached into the hole and touched Fang Lian's stomach. Fang Lian was so scared that he quickly hid behind, but his legs were pulled back by the lost door, and his fists were also clamped down, and his knees were pressed against his legs. At that time, he felt that he was pressed down by a stone. There was no temperature and he was very stiff. The zombie continued to touch Fang Lian, who was pressed down. His mind was blank. What kind of hobby was this? To cut open his stomach and cut out his heart? The mourner touched his chest and could feel his heart beating violently. The red pupils looked at the music above and the frightened eyes were tight and conflicted. The expression was not as good as before. The zombie released him and slowly retreated to the bed. Fang Lian stared nervously and then saw the mourner turn around and stare at the cabinet for a few seconds before opening the cabinet door and rummaging through it a few times. He pulled out a white shirt and threw it on the bed. Fang Lian said a word. Fang Lian, who was shocked by the excessive human nature of zombies, looked at the white shirt. This time, he did not face the mourners and put it on. The king of the funeral household stared at Fang Lian's raised arm muscles. The muscle lines were obvious. There were clear abdominal muscles. It was very beautiful. Fang Lian sat cross-legged on the bed after wearing it. He stared at the funeral household. It was quite speechless. "You're so awesome, you're just looking at me here. You go out and kill everywhere. I can see flowers." He silently complains in his heart that the mourner standing beside the bed staring at him suddenly walks over and pulls him over with his pants. Then he pulls Fang Lianlu into his arms on the first floor. It was so exciting that he even avoided it and slapped his face twice. It was really strange. He slapped his own face. He couldn't even react to his cough. He was so angry that his face didn't even react. What are you doing? Why don't you just bite me to death? I beg you, big brother. After choosing to stab Fang Lian for a while, Fang Lian has lost his energy. He simply didn't bother. The mourner's dry hand turned his face away to face himself. Fang Lian stared at the mourner's face in front of him. He was very upset. He turned back the mourner's ruler and gave it to him. He held the human face closer and poked his face with his finger. Then he pinched his nose to look good. Fang Lian stared at the bereaved face in front of him and could clearly see the dried blood on each other's hair. "I didn't want to look at you." He wanted to turn his head. The bereaved king wouldn't let him turn around. Press his face and force them to look at each other. "I'm a good captain who brought so many people to life, and now he's being held by a zombie building. He's white and blind. He just changed his clean shirt. He can't smell what he smells. The blood on his hair is sticky." Before he can roar in his heart, he suddenly lets go of the mourner who is holding him. He put his waist under his arm and raised his bedroom. Fang Lian's limbs were suspended and he was taken into the bathroom. He was thrown aside. The bathroom door was closed. Under Fang Lian's sad eyes, the door was locked. "Then I went to the shower and stared at the faucet switch. I wiped it. I didn't want to take a shower." In an instant, the sound of the water poured down and the mourner stung himself. It took off its dirty clothes and turned around to look at the human whose eyes were wide open. It moved its bloodless lips and did not run away. This was a warning not to run away when he was washing up. Fang Lian hadn't thought of running away for a while. His mind was still full of the shock brought by the zombie forest. The deceased households several months ago were all dry or incomplete, and this dead ruler in front of me, except for the rough surface of the skin, the whole body is no different from a normal person. The pectoral muscles and abdominal muscles are very clear, and the fuck is dead. Does this thing not shrink? The zombies were already standing under the flower wine, but when they heard Fang Lian's exclamation, they turned around and stared at him. This man wakes up in the morning with a burning pain in his back, and he looks at the deceased lying next to him and he thinks, he used to be the captain of the survivors, but now he's the pillow of the deceased. Not only do I have to hug him every day, but I want to have a monkey with him because he was framed by his most trusted teammate. Fang Lian fell from the 7th floor into the zombie crowd and closed his eyes in despair. However, the imaginary pain did not appear, only the back of the place hit the numb tree fall right Sun 7? Fang Lian was shocked because the color of his eyes was different from that of humans. The zombie king looked at him for a while and turned around to continue washing. At this time, Fang Lian finally recovered and looked at the locked door. The zombie king is 3 steps away. I don't think he'll be able to open it for a while. I turn around and look at the bathroom window. Fortunately, there's no anti-theft net. If you open the window and jump F from the 2nd floor, you should be able to fall well. He uses the sound of water to cover up and move to the window. When he is half a meter away from the window, he stepped on the water on the bathroom tile and almost slipped. Fortunately, he held onto the shelf next to him. The mourner suddenly turned around and looked at him without any emotion. His red pupils were like a vortex with thoughts. Can you still be more idiotic? Fang Lian scolded himself in his heart and grabbed the bottle on the shelf and looked at it, and then handed it over awkwardly. I'll get you some bubbles to rub it, which can be fragrant. As soon as he finished speaking, the mourner reached out and grabbed the bottle and Fang Lian's bottle with his hand and pulled him over to wash the incense for you. Fang Lian frantically hid backwards, and the whole person had a restless panic. I didn't wash you. You washed the zombies. Fang Lian chose to continue to squat in the corner with an expression of no love. After the funeral ruler was washed, the clothes that he took off were all stained with blood. Even the funeral households did not plan to wear it again. Fang Lian's eyes looked at it in an instant, naked and coming towards him. I suddenly had a bad feeling in my head. What are you doing? I'm a star, you're a star, but no matter how dirty, he scolded. The mourner directly picked him up horizontally and walked out of the bathroom in Fang Lian's foul-mouthed roar. It's too shameful. Can you put on some pants? This is too shameful. And then the more humiliating thing was that the bereaved threw him back on the bed and then took him in his arms again. He stared at the bereaved with half his mouth open. It turned out that this was a sick bereaved family. Fang Li took the risk of giving up the tie and only made a request. Please find a pair of pants to put on, okay? Put it on and I won't run. The bereaved king looked at himself and then went to the wardrobe to look for Fang Lian. He never dreamed that he would go from a domineering survivor squad leader to a bereaved pillow in one day, and it was not an ordinary pillow. And I had to hold his face and look at it, and then I looked at his fingers and toes one by one, and then I made up a line: good looking, tired, destroyed. Fang Lian was really tired, and he let the mourners pick up his fingers and toes and look at it. Finally, he actually fell asleep. That night, he slept unusually well. After all, he no longer had to worry about being besieged by the bereaved. He was already in the bereaved nest. Except for his stomach, he was a little hungry, but he was very tired. He didn't want to wake up. He had been dreaming and talking about good money. He wanted to eat meat. Zombies don't need to rest at all. He just likes to look at this good-looking human. Before dawn, he heard Fang Lian say he was hungry. He wrapped this human in a blanket, then he stood up and walked out of the bedroom. When Fang Lian woke up, he almost fell off his wings. He was about to curse. Shishi Man's door opened, and a smell of blood came to his face. Shishi Man's scissors looked at the mourner and carried a piece of meat to the bed. Shishi Man's scissors sent it to his face. Shishi Man cut that piece of meat dripping red water. Shishi Man poked it in front of Fang Lian Shishi before making him retch at that time. Fortunately, there was nothing to vomit in his stomach. This was the funeral king. He ran out for several miles and finally caught a live rabbit. Before coming back, he also deliberately plucked hair and peeled the province. This human is not good at mouth. Shishi Hong Fang Lian's eyes are filled with tears. Shishi Man is deeply grateful for his refusal. Maybe one day he couldn't find food, but now he couldn't swallow this bloody thing. The zombie king looked at the rabbit meat that was still bleeding in his hand. He turned around and walked out. After a while, he picked up the rabbit and threw it on the bed with two things in his left hand: a big bag of coffee and a can of luncheon meat. Fang Lian opened the can and took a bite of the rabbit meat. After a while, he dirtied his clothes. Fang Lian nibbled on the canned food while observing this funeral home. This funeral home is different from the outside world. He still has humanity. He still remembers that people can take a shower and go to the toilet. Remember to find something for themselves to eat. Fang Lian felt that this funeral home was actually not bad. It was not that he wanted to become a funeral home. Isn't this still developing towards human beings? Perhaps he could also understand the reason. Shishi thought like this. Fang Lian asked the funeral home who drank blood, "Do you remember who you are? What's your name? You stopped eating raw meat like you thought for a minute." Fang Lian's eyes widened and he was a little unhappy. He didn't say anything, but he complained in his heart that I knocked on this funeral home. It's good that I don't have the quality to tell it. It's still pregnant with me. The mourner looked at him, dropped the rabbit meat on the ground, and walked towards the door. Fang La, who is pitiful, has a face full of pity and eats well. What's wrong with him? Does he have an appetite? He went to the door and opened the drawer to take something back. Fang Lian pinched it and found that it was actually an ID card. The photo on it was a very handsome boy. Pei Zhao suddenly reacted and looked around the villa, and then I looked at the mourner in disbelief, and it turned out to be your house, Watts. How did you get bitten and talk? Did you not completely become a mourner? The mourner stared blankly at Fang Lian, who suddenly became excited. Fang Lian grabbed the tattered clothes on the ground and wiped the bloodstains on his mouth. From resistance to celebration, it turned into sympathy for me. Damn you, this lost family not only saved his life, but also brought him back to his home. It became a lost family and still guarded his home. That brother of the deceased seems to be a bit ugly. Fang Lian pulled the family of the deceased and changed his name to Brother Hu. Pei Zhao shouted at him unhappily. Fang Lian quickly changed his tone to Brother Pei. Pei Zhao was not angry this time. Fang Lian thought about it and did something he didn't dare to think about before. He introduced himself to a mourner. Brother Pei, my name is Fang Lian. Do you understand me? Pei Zhao tilted his head and thought for a moment. He seemed to be a little happy. Fang Lian was stunned. It's not my name. Ren. Why do you have the same aesthetic as my mother? When he heard that, his mother Fang Lian was a little sad. He was silent emo. After 7 minutes, he was angered by Pei Zhao. Pei Zhao listened to his heart and complained that he looked down at himself like his mother. Then he looked at Fang Lian, who was not very happy, and refuted that his male was not his mother. Then he pointed out that he was his father. Fang Lian was shocked. "It wasn't me who called you brother. You wanted to treat me as more." He opened his mouth and wanted to retort. When he went back, he thought of Pei Klu. He slept, looked at his fingers, looked at his face, and even liked his feet. Did Pei Zhao have a son before he became a deceased family? Pei Zhao grabbed his wrist and explained to Duan Lele anxiously. "No, don't call me Lala, okay? It's weird for a man to call me Lala." Fang Lian has to make it clear to Pei Zhao that he's not his son. He pointed to his mouth. Fang Lisi, Pei Zhao, tilted his head, paused for 2 seconds, happy, which was a little irritating. After spending a few days with Pei Zhao, Fang Lian tried to reason with him. Pei Zhao understood, but no matter what, he hugged him like a dog, and it became more and more rare. He's a normal doomsday survivor. Captain doesn't want to be raised as a pet dog. At least he has to go back for revenge. Today, there aren't many cooked foods at home. Pei Zhao wants to go to the nearest supermarket to get some cans because Lele likes meat. After all, he didn't hear Lele thinking about running these days. He left Fang Lian in the villa and went out. However, in order to avoid breaking the glass when he was absent, he went out. After Pei Kai left, Fang Lian found a baseball bat in the house. He took a fruit knife from the kitchen, and he could imagine how angry Pei Zhao would be when he came back, but he had to go back and get his revenge on that dirty account, and he wanted to know who else in Liao Fei's team hated him. He believes that most people are still willing to follow their own tightly held baseball bat out of the door of the villa. There is a funeral home. Fang Lian slowed down and approached. Before the mourner turned his head around, he pointed at the mourner's neck and put the fruit knife into the other party's eye socket. The mourner scratched Fang Lian's shirt a few times and coughed half a cough, but stopped in summer. Even if it was only half a roar, it still attracted another Fang Lian not far away. He rushed up to the mourner who was rushing towards him with a vigorous stride. The baseball bat in his hand was thrown out with a bang, and the mourner fell down regardless of whether he died or not. Fang Lian dared not stay outside the villa and ran towards the entrance of the villa area. There was a constant roar of mourners behind him, but he didn't look back. This kind of walking meat didn't run as fast as he did. All he had to do was solve the obstacles in front of him. The baseball bat whistled and knocked down several mourners who came from the front. The path in the villa area was relatively clean. He had to rush out as fast as he could to find a car that could drive. However, what Fang Lian did not know was that there were countless families wandering around the villa area. And on this street, there were fewer families who lost their lives because Pei Zhao chased them away. Most of them were afraid that Fang Lian would be discovered and cause a siege. The fact that he was not far from the gate of the villa when he realized that the noise he caused quickly attracted the crowd of mourners who gathered around the other buildings. In an instant, there was a riot, accompanied by a sudden roar, and countless mourners poured out from all corners. The roar came from far and near, and Fang Lian's shocked eyes were everywhere. Without much hesitation, he turned and ran back as several mourners on both sides of the street pounced on him. Fang Lian swung his stick again as if it had hit a wall of meat. He looked back and saw a large, fat mourner screaming at him crazily. He held the stench of decay and rushed towards him. Fang Lian was stunned for a moment, but he still reacted quickly to avoid the fat mourner and fell to the ground with a bang. Just dodging this giant thing, the escape route ahead is a few levels, and it will be drowned by the loss. Fang Lian runs forward with his life, and his mind has completely failed to keep up with the frequency of the weapon in his hand. At this moment, Fang Lian realized that these zombies were all controlled by Pei Zhao. He missed out on Pei Zhao's impression that Pei Zhao could only understand human speech when he was with him. He didn't remember carefully that he was a lost family king, and there would be countless lost families around him. As the number of zombies increased, his body nine gradually fell into a disadvantage. I'm afraid he's going to die here today. With the constant waving of baseball bats, his arms are extremely sore. He ran as fast as he could, but he still saw the gap in front of him buried by the dead, and all he could see were terrifying faces and limbs reaching out to grab and burn like crazy. Exhausted, he was soon drowned in the huddle.